Hi, I'm Julie Ross,
And I'm Elizabeth Cohen.
and this is the Parenting Horizons podcast.
Julie Ross is a parent educator and counselor with over 30 years of experience in private practice.
Elizabeth is a clinical psychologist with over 20 years of experience in private practice.
Perhaps most importantly, we're parents just like you.
Through conversations covering a wide range of different parenting topics, challenges, and roadblocks, we hope to give you some practical tools that might just help make parenting a little bit easier.
Nobody's perfect, and parenting is challenging, to say the least. But with a few skills under our belts, we might just be able to be good enough parents and enjoy the journey and our children a little bit more in the process.
Hi, we're back with the Parenting Horizons podcast. I am Julie Ross, and I am here, as usual, with Elizabeth Cohen. How are things going for you, Elizabeth?
Really well, thanks. I'm really happy to be here with you today.
I'm always happy to be here with you. It's such an insightful time. I think we share things with our listeners, but we share things with each other as well, which is really, I think, helpful. I really enjoy it. So today, Elizabeth and I wanted to talk about summer. And so for some people, summertime for their kids means camp, either a day camp or a sleepover camp. For others, it means that their kid's going to go to work during the summer somewhere. And for others, it just means that their kids are going to have a lot more free time. So we really wanted to cover primarily the camp stuff, I think, because there are reluctant campers and parents who pay for camp are paying a lot of money. So if their child is being belligerent about going or resisting going or showing anxiety about going, it's understandable that the parent is not going to want to lose the money that they've already invested in camp. I thought, though, today, Elizabeth, because I think we probably have very different experiences with summer. So I want to ask you, did you go to camp when you were growing up?
When I was younger, when I was in elementary school, I went to a day camp, actually at the 63rd Street
Oh,
Y,
yeah.
swimming, pottery, and I really had a good time because for me, it was quite different than my school, which was very rigid academically, and it was also a religious school. So
Oh.
this was kind of an opportunity for me to have different, which maybe we'll talk about one of the advantages, like different kinds of friends. And what I found myself and for my kids was not having the focus on academics. I really got to see other parts of myself really flourish. So that was really quite fun. And then I have an interesting experience with sleepaway camp, which is that I was always told by my parents that I was too anxious to go to sleepaway
Oh,
camp,
wow.
that I would have been too worried at sleepaway camp. And if you've been our listener for a while or you know us, you know that was much more likely my parents' anxiety and not mine.
Yeah.
So I was not really given the opportunity to try it out and see if I like it. That was kind of the narrative I was told. So for me, I kind of always had this question, this kind of longing and curiosity around it. And I do think, and we can talk about this later, it did impact one of my experiences with one of my kids at sleepaway camp, like because I never got to have it. And it did add a little pressure, I think. So I have a kind of unique experience.
So it added some pressure to send them?
Yeah, I think I never wanted them to feel that even though I was going to miss them, that I wouldn't want them to go because that was my experience. And so I think I pushed my son in a way to stay in a camp where he wasn't comfortable, to try a different camp the next year. Like I think I had a little too much invested in it based on my own experience of what felt like lack, because as a therapist, especially in New York City, I know we're in the Northeast and camp is popular here. It's not in everywhere, and we'll hear about your story, Julie. I had heard so many people talking so fondly about their camp friends, as they would say, that I really longed for that for myself, and I think that I kind of projected that onto
Right.
him.
Yeah. Well, so my experience is vastly different. I grew up in Texas, and camp wasn't a thing that people did. Go to camp. What was that? I mean, literally, they did not think about it or do it back in the day when I was that age. Instead, we went to the neighborhood pool. We wandered around the neighborhood freely because it was a suburb, very, very safe, it felt like. So I didn't really have the camp experience until I got into high school. And then I went to a 1 week church camp. Now, I don't want anybody to think of it like what you might, it's not the righteous gemstones, right? It was a very mild, loose, formatted thing, but I was miserable. I was miserable. I was a very highly anxious kid. I came from a divorced family. I had a lot of attachment issues in terms of being too attached to the parent who stayed, which was, I mean, my father stayed, but in terms of the parent I lived with. So I was so anxious to leave my mother that it was not the
Mm-hmm.
experience that it was for my sisters. So my
Mm.
sisters, they can still sing the camp songs. They still have wonderful memories. And I really didn't get that. So the way that that translated to my own children and raising my children here in the Northeast, camp is something that people do here, right? And I thought I needed to do something with my children because I was working full time. So they couldn't be underfoot when they were younger. So I did send them to a day camp, and I kind of felt like that was almost a bridge too far. And I thought, I'm never sending them to sleepaway camp. But then my daughter had different ideas. She's my oldest. And she came home and one day and said, Mommy, I want to go to sleepaway camp. And I was like, I was resistant to it. But she pushed and we investigated, and she ended up going to a sleepaway camp that she loved only for, I think it was only 4 weeks, but she loved, loved, loved it and had such a good experience there. And so with that experience, I came to learn the benefits of if you can
Mm.
send your child to a summer camp, there are benefits to that because there's so much growth that happens during that time. So then my son comes along, 5 years younger, and and I'm thinking that my son will never even leave home to go to college. Just not that kind of kid. That they were going to remain tucked under my wing because for their choice forever. But I needed to get them out of the house because of my work. And our daughter had had such a great time at camp, and I knew that type of camp, which was very outdoorsy, would not be my son's interest. So I got some advice and I found a camp that had things that were more along my son's, the way my son was curious, which was about Dungeons and Dragons. So they said they wanted to go, and we sent them for successfully for 2 weeks the first time and 4 weeks after that. And I don't think they saw the sunshine once. They were in this big building playing Dungeons and Dragons the entire time. And again, the growth that I saw was so remarkable. And maybe you can speak a little bit to what you think the benefits of camp are.
Absolutely. I wanted to share also that I had an experience of growth for both of my kids as
Mm.
well, and I'm glad you brought up both of your kids. So my son is the older one, and I also looked into areas of his curiosity and found a camp that did fill some of his curiosity, and he struggled with the lack of structure. At that time, he has ADHD, but he wasn't treated for that in the way that he is now. And I think it's hard for parents to wrap, for me, I should say, it's hard for me to wrap my mind around that. My son really relies on safe adults. And most of the people who work at camp are teenagers.
Oh, yeah.
And so the counselors are 15,
Yeah.
17, the grown-ups, the grown-ups who can really hold space in the way that I think we do as parents are the administrators. They're not there every day. And I think there are just some kids. My daughter had a totally different experience. She went for 4 years, loved it. She doesn't need the checking in with adults in the same way that my son did. It just wasn't the environment that helped him thrive or help him. It didn't meet some of his emotional
Right.
needs. And there was no way for me to have known that. And I think the growth there is that he learned that about
Right.
himself. We in our family talked about what worked, what didn't work, not saying I hate camp. He tried a different camp the next year and we found some of the same patterns. And so that was really, really helpful. And it helped when he's been choosing other things in his life.
Right.
So it was a laboratory to understand how, at least for him and I think other kids, what works for you and what doesn't. And I want to say something about my daughter. I really think one of the reasons she loved camp is because academics and school was challenging for
Mm.
her. She also has ADHD, and she is an incredibly bright kid. So she always went to schools that had high demand. And I think my sense, and she would share, she always felt a little bit behind,
Mhm.
or that people weren't understanding her what she could offer.
Right.
But then at camp, when academics were not there at all, and other skills like art and dance and her glowing personality and her empathy, she really felt seen in a different way than she did all those other 9 months. And I think that was really important for her building her self confidence.
Yeah.
So I think they both learned something different from
Yeah.
it.
I think that's so true. And the thing that stays constant is that there's growth.
Absolutely. And we have tons of clients in our practice who parents will call us, kid is homesick. Do we go get them? Do we not? Do we let them come home? It's always a question, right? And we answer exactly as you said, which is either choice is a growth opportunity. To stay is a growth opportunity, and to leave is a growth opportunity. And it's just how you approach it. There isn't a right answer. I think we go into camp. I don't know if you see this, Julie, but with like rigid ideas of like, if the kid's successful, they stay and they have a great time.
Yes.
It's like, if anytime you've gone as an adult to a party, like you can be invited to 5 parties. Some of them you like, some of them you don't.
Right.
Some you want to stay, some you leave early,
Right.
right? I mean, to not put so much pressure on the kids and on yourself to have this like perfect experience, I think is important, and to see it as a learning opportunity. I think that's really, you were asking like what is one of the benefits. I think that's the biggest benefit, that it's a laboratory that isn't school, with other kids, with other adults, to get to know yourself
Right.
better.
Right. And I want to interject here that I recognize, as you do as well, how ridiculously expensive camp is. The numbers that
Yes.
parents float in front of me today, I can't conceive of paying that much money for my kid to go to camp. It was much less expensive when I sent my children. So I want to talk about, before we get into what to do about the reluctant camper, I want to talk about how summer itself, with its unstructured time, can be the same sort of growth opportunity as going
Hmm.
to a formal camp setting. So, hearkening back to my childhood, I made such good friends in the summer who, even though we were in the same neighborhood and therefore went to the same school, our paths might not have crossed because the schools I went to were huge. 800 kids in a class, kind of huge. So our paths might not have crossed, but in the summer, we're kicking around. I'm out on the sidewalk in my roller skates and and I skate by Susan's house, and Susan comes out and says, "What's your name?" And there's that opportunity for that kind of connection and friendship. I also think that there's such an important thing to be said for unstructured time. Especially our kids today are filled with devices and Instagrams and Snapchats, and that I feel like is limiting their ability to experience life and grow a little bit more quickly. I think it's limiting to their creativity. I think it damaging ultimately to their self-esteem because they're seeing what other kids are doing and comparing themselves. So if I had to say, and I want you to chime in, to parents who can't afford to send their child to a camp, either a day camp or a sleepaway camp, I want to say to them, instead of thinking about what you can't do, what can you do? What can work? So when my kids were little, I had Camp Julie, right? With a friend of mine. So we shared our children. We had our work schedules just happened to be, we found each other, and our work schedules happened to be so that I could take her kid and she could take mine when the other had to work. And it really, even doing play dates when she couldn't do it, having a play date, having somebody that we could, say, "Hey, are you free today? Can Jeremy play with Alan?" for example, was it's not exactly a camp experience, but it is a learning experience. Learning to get along with others, learning to be a little self-sufficient without having something to do.
I did something, yeah, I did something similar when my kids were younger. We did a camp co-op. So we actually, there were a couple of high schoolers, and it was a bunch of, and like 4 or 5 parents. And so there were some people who could kind of move the kids around to the different houses, and had to coordinate it. But we really shared, I think, the experience of the summer. And I think if we step back for a minute, it's such a big burden on parents. And especially, very often it's the mother who's caretaking for the children primarily, even if they're the breadwinner. That's not always the case. And suddenly in some places, there's 3 months with
Mhm.
no coverage.
Mhm.
It's a social, cultural, political issue
Yes.
about how we don't have care for children and families in that way.
100%.
And so I just want to say that I think it's a puzzle that is very difficult to figure
Mhm.
out. It Because as I'm thinking about how much we coordinated, it took so much emotional
Oh,
energy
yeah.
and brain
Yes.
power to coordinate the bit, who was going to be where, and then what happens if it rains, it's, and so I just want to name the labor of it
Yes.
first and just say it is. And I think, I grew up in New York City. And so I grew up spending the whole summer. And when I wasn't going to camp, just in the playground, my parents would like kind of sit there or drop me off basically, and I'd hang out in the
Right.
playground. And I think that what you're bringing up about growing up in Texas and the safe environment, I think we really are doing our kids a disservice by telling them that everything is unsafe now
Yes, I
somehow,
agree.
that being together structured in the burbs or in New York City in a park, like the facts of now, going back to our one of our podcasts, is that most people are good and safe. And so really trying to be creative around giving your kids, depending on their age, just a bit more
Yeah.
independence. Maybe they go to the library for the afternoon
Right.
and drop them off and you pick them up.
Yes.
New York, in particular, has a lot of free opportunities, or to a museum, or what can you do where you're stepping back a little
Mhm.
bit and they're learning a little bit of
Yeah.
independence. And then this is also making me think about the need to learn how to be bored,
100%. Kids do not
right?
know how to be bored today, and it is within boredom that the great ideas happen.
The best ideas happen within boredom. I absolutely, in the stillness and the quietness. I mean, it's such an interesting thing that we do, where they're so busy, adults do, we're filling attention all the time. And then we have, then you go to a mindfulness class. It's like we create the problem and then give this, solution, but the solution is right there, which is just to slow
Yes.
down. And, the other question is, I really like and think about cyclical living a lot, that we in this modern age think we have to just be the same every day, that every 24 hours is the
Oh, yeah.
same, that seasons don't change. As a parent, if your kids are home, maybe you look at what do you do less of over the summer because it's harder on you. Like, really think, if you can, about what you might be able to shift or change, or what extra help you might need. Maybe you have grandparents come in,
Right.
or aunts and uncles who you've never asked for help. I mean, I think there's this need to really step back and look at that. If the system that we're in is demanding so much of
Hmm.
us, we need to get some help,
Yeah.
whatever that might
Whatever
look
that
like.
might look like.
Yeah.
And I urge our listeners to think out of the box. Just like you said,
Yes.
why not take them to the library? Let them be there a half a day and they can read books, and they can, I mean, libraries even have computers now. You can be on the computer.
Exactly. And it's air conditioned.
Exactly. Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
Right? Leave them even at a playground. Like, I mean, I know you can sit maybe with your laptop across the way, but I mean, again, I grew up in New York City in the 80s, so this is not shocking to me, but that's what I did with my
Right.
kids. They know when something doesn't feel comfortable. So I think just I love this idea of thinking outside of the box, looking at for free events that are happening.
And I think if you go to, I know here in New York City that you can go to the nyc.gov website, and it has a listing of all of the free things that can be done. I know that there's yoga in on the piers, there's walks in Central Park to discover the flora and fauna. There's rock
Yeah, there's classes in
climbing.
the
Mhm,
recreational
yeah.
part. Yeah.
So
Hmm.
I'm
Yeah.
sure that other states have similar things. Well, I'm not sure, but I think it's a place to start.
Yeah, and just to start get thinking, I love that idea of thinking outside of the box. And at least in New York City, I know at the local pools, they give lunch, breakfast and lunch. So also, New York City is a place where because that's another piece. If you're used to feeding your kid at school, that's a whole new expense that happens in the summer. So it's important to look for those resources. I do think they're out there. They're just, again, going back to the labor we have to do. It's a little bit
Yeah, I
laborious.
would agree. So let's talk a little bit about the child who was eager to go to summer camp when you had to sign them up in September for the next year. And as we approach that date, is starting to refuse. I'm not going to come. I'm not going to go. And meanwhile, you've spent way too much money on this camp. So what kind of strategies, Elizabeth, do you think can help parents?
Yeah, I've got some that would love to share. I think I would first start with the strategy we've talked about so much on this podcast, which is first just regulating your nervous
Mhm.
system around that response. Because even Julie saying it and then saying how much it costs, I found my spine kind of jumping up, of just wanting to say, like, of course you're going. What do you mean? Just to jump right into you're doing it, not even a question. Because I think there's a feeling that if I reflect the emotion of fear, then somehow I'm saying it's okay to not go. So I think it's really important, right, to first, as you always say, that all communication, all behavior is a communication. So saying that I'm uncomfortable is communicating that I'm nervous or that I don't want to go. Is if someone's the child who says, I don't want to go is saying I'm nervous. And so not getting into the content and focusing on the emotion and maybe saying, oh, come and sit on my lap and tell me a little bit about what you're nervous
Mhm.
about. And that can be so helpful because so often, kids have ideas about camp that are based on TV shows or stories they heard on the bus or something maybe they saw on social media. And so it's really great to find out what specifically are you nervous about,
Yes.
right? And then you can really start looking at, going back to the facts, what is the camp going to be like? So, one thing we do is we'll go on the website with the child, or suggest parents do, and really look through. I mean, especially since COVID, these websites are unbelievable. They show everything. They show a day in the life, they show the Dungeons and Dragon room. Like, you can,
Yes.
they have a map, they have a schedule. I
Mhm.
mean, you can walk your kid through, this is what a day is going to look like. I'm nervous about not being able to find places. Oh, okay, let's look at that. This looks like an S. Can we remember where this is? You want to practice every day before you go, the pattern, right? You
Yes.
can really help prepare them with some of the unknown, because it's so
Right.
unknown. I mean, it's, again, it's just the biggest unknown. So that's one strategy. Did you want to say something about that,
I
or?
do. I just want to say that I think the strategy is excellent. I think parents need to avoid, and one a huge mistake that I hear parents making is over reassurance. Like, you're going to be fine. You're going to love it. Wait till you get there. You won't even be thinking about me. You're going to have so much fun. You've got this. It's going to be great. And that does not work because that invalidates their feelings. As you said, they're feeling
Exactly.
anxious. Maybe one thing that would help would be to look at the landscape. Would it help to look at the website and see what the day is gonna look like? And what do you think? If you were, can you envision yourself being in that cabin? But really creating these kind of open-ended questions as opposed to these platitudes that that's not going to go down.
Exactly. And I think that's such an important point, Julie. I'm so glad you brought it up, because everybody has a rainy day at camp, physically or
I love
emotionally.
that. Yeah.
So if you have been told constantly by your parents that it's going to be great, you're going to love it, and then, I don't know, you wake up one day not really loving it, because that's just how life
Yeah.
is. We have some rainy
Yeah,
days.
exactly.
Then you think there's something wrong with you, or you worry that you're not, there's something you could do, right? So it's putting on to your child an expectation that they're supposed to feel one way or the other. My parents gave me the negative
Yes.
expectation. You can't go because you'll feel, I'm sure I would have sometimes felt anxious, but I probably also would have had a good time. That can be the both and.
Yes.
So I really do appreciate that. And I would recommend to parents, and we haven't talked about this yet, I'll share this kind of private story, which is my experience, but I think that parents, and myself included, struggle with acknowledging that sending our kids to camp is hard for us.
Yes.
By the way, probably harder than for them. I wasn't going somewhere where I got to do pottery with my friends, painting with my friends, dressing up at night. I was still working. Like, my life was not right. So I remember saying to a therapist at the time, when my kids were going, like, I don't want them to know that I'm going to miss them, or something around missing them, as if that was a failure on my part, that missing them, that I was supposed to just be fine with them going to camp. Because I think also I hear a lot of parents being like, I can't wait, I need a break. And all of that is true. And it's okay to miss them. And I needed to own my feelings instead of putting it on them. So I think when a lot of parents say, you're going to be fine, you're going to be fine, you're going to be fine, that's because they're telling themselves that.
Right.
Don't you
Oh,
think?
yeah, I absolutely do. And I'm just reminded of when I first took my daughter to camp and then separately took my son to camp, several years later. And I put on my brave face and I was like, this is awesome. I'm so glad you can have this experience. And then we walked to the parking lot and I got in the car and I burst into tears. And I said to my husband, I need a milkshake and some bacon. I was so distraught. But I put on my brave face. That didn't mean that I engaged in platitudes with him. I didn't say, oh, you're going to have a great time. Or I had to allow myself to feel those feelings.
Exactly. I just really want to encourage parents to be able to do that, and then attend to your kid and what's going on with
Exactly.
them. And just know that anxiety about camp is so normal and
Yes.
typical. Like I think it's an exception to not be have any anxiety about it. It's a huge shift and a huge change in a new place. Even if they're going back somewhere they've known, there's new counselors, there's new kids. So I think just really want to
I
normalize
think
that.
that's good. I think the more that we can help people understand that these are pretty universal feelings, they're not unique to you, so that you can be anxious, even if there's really not something tangible to be anxious about.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think that it's the unknown, but it's also a shift in our daily life. I mean, I always used to think like for 9 months, 10 months, you're doing the same thing with your kids and mostly every day. And then there's summer comes and it's a big shift and a big change only for 2 months until you go back. Like it's a little
Yeah.
bit of an odd, I don't know why I'm having this image of like a factory, but like the factory stops and then everything changes and then we have to pick up again. And so it is a little bit of a unique experience. So just to keep just I think in our culture we also don't really honor endings and beginnings. So we don't have a lot tons of rituals, right?
Mhm.
So a lot of schools that I know, at least in New York City, we go a little bit later than many schools in other places. So some kids don't even get to finish school because they have to go to camp before school ends. So also I would say really think about delineating the time. I think that could be really important. Like, this is the end of school. Let's do a ritual,
Yes.
go for ice cream after school or something. Night before camp, we do this. Really just to kind of mark those
Well, I like
times.
that very much. I think that's a really good idea. So, what other strategies other strategies might be
Yeah.
available to parents?
Yeah, I touched on this a little bit with my son. I wish we had done this which is always to know who is a point person for them to go to. I should say when they struggle, not if they struggle, because I think it's inevitable that there'll be
Yeah.
something. You can't have all those kids together, without a ton of structure and developmental brains and yeah,
Exactly.
I mean, not have one thing. If it's like this person used my soap or, I lost all of my, underwear or something. And so really trying to connect, and I think the camps are really good at this, who the point person will be for your kiddo. And as I mentioned earlier, not necessarily the counselor, but a grown up, someone who they can go to and who also isn't involved in the bunk, because I think there can be a lot of bunk dynamics. And so someone who's really on the outside. I mean, as a therapist, we certainly have clients who schedule to still have therapy sessions while they're in camp. So they might have a phone session, a check-in, especially if they're more anxious or they want. So I think if your kid's in therapy, that can always be an option. Again, there's no right way to do this. That's a safe person that they know who helps them cope through
Mhm.
things. But if you can't do that, there's medical providers, there's
Right.
administrators, really trying to locate someone who maybe they can talk to before camp. But I think that's a really important piece of feeling contained and when you're away from your parents.
Right, and maybe even to the extent of having them meet this person, because otherwise it remains the person remains a stranger, remains unknown. There's no
Yeah, and
trust.
then it's on the kid.
Yeah, there's no trust. So, that's a great idea to create a point person.
I really like that. And that's also a point person for the parents, right? So the parents, when you start getting anxious, because there's a lot of like, usually the kids can't call but if you start getting anxious to say, like, I'm gonna have the kid reach out to you, but I'm also wondering if I can reach out to you. Now, our
Yes.
suggestion would be reach out to your friends first, reach out to your therapist, reach out to people not in camp. But if you're feeling so built up with anxiety, then that's your point person too. And then you know that you have a point person who you can say, I'm feeling a little anxious, instead of what a lot of us do, which is, I noticed in the photo that my kid didn't have their goggles, because they send all these photos
Yes.
now. You probably didn't do that when your kids, yeah.
No, not as
Um,
much, but yes, I know.
yes, right. And so it's like this thing of like, I'm really asking about the goggles, but I'm really trying to check in on my
Yeah.
kid, So just to be honest with yourself, if that you might need some support too, and who might you go to?
Right.
So I think that's another important point. And then a big concern for a lot of kids is falling asleep at night.
Mm.
They're busy during the day, they're active, they have a lot going on, they're kind of distracted. And that is when most of us, when we settle down, when a lot of our most scary thoughts can come to us, and sometimes homesickness. So, one thing that we do in our practice is that we create what we call coping
Mhm.
cards with clients, which is, if we can, we try to laminate a card with coping strategies. And this might be anything from a different thought. Like, for example, I'm feeling homesick now. I knew I was going to feel this
Mm.
way. I'm going to imagine coming home and my parents hugging me, or I'm going to remember what it felt like to sit on the couch and watch a TV show with them. You kind of bring a soothing image to counteract the thought. So it can be thoughts that it can be coping thoughts card, or every kid here gets nervous sometimes. I'm going to be fine. It can be those kinds of internal thoughts, or they can be tools like I'm going to listen. We work with kids to get them music that isn't on a phone, because a lot of the places don't like you to have phones. So I'm going to listen to some
Mhm.
music, or I'm going to practice my deep breathing, or I'm going to crochet, or I'm going to play with my silly putty, or I'm going to find a counselor. Kind of a list of tools, because we've talked about this in other podcasts. When our amygdala, our emotional brain, gets overwhelmed with stress, it is very hard for us to problem solve and make decisions and cope, because our frontal lobes are not connected to our amygdala at that time of stress. So having a reference is wonderful, because our earlier self knew what we should do when we were stressed, when we weren't stressed.
Right.
But now that we're stressed, it's hard to access
Yes.
it. So having a coping card can really help kids, one, remember that they have tools, and two, to use
Yeah.
them to shift through what they might be going through.
I love the fact that it's concrete. In other words, it is something they can physically hold and physically keep under their pillow. And sometimes just having that and being able to touch it is enough to remind them of what the strategies are. Because as you said, when our nervous system is dysregulated, we can't access what we know might help. I'm curious as to what you might say, Elizabeth, about either, and this comes up all the time in my practice, the child who, on the day that the parents can call, right? There's usually a day or whatever. The child is like, I'm miserable, or the child is writing letters home. I'm miserable. This is the worst camp
Yes.
ever. I'm being bullied. I mean, all of this stuff. But when the parent goes online to see the pictures, there's the kid with their arms around other kids, and they all seem to be. How does a parent reconcile those two different stories that they're being presented with?
I think that's just really challenging. I just want to name that first of all. And I think that in some ways, in an extremes case, that's why it's good for you to also have a point person. But I would also ask the parents to reflect on, I don't know, maybe a recent Saturday or Sunday when you spent the day with your kids, and maybe they woke up in a really good mood. And maybe you went somewhere with them and had a lot of hopes that that good mood would stay, and then maybe by the afternoon they were less happy with you. And imagine how they would write a letter to someone else about the morning versus the evening. So I think it's really tough,
Yeah.
because we change all the time. I mean, you hear these stories that people write those, kids write those letters. That's what's so great about letters. And then you talk to them 2 days later and they're totally fine, because it was just an in the moment
Yes.
experience. And so I think that it is a really challenging balance to figure out. But going back to learning opportunity, and this is what happened with my kid, like, if they're not in danger,
Right.
they're learning something.
Right, exactly. And I think that I think is what parents should keep in mind when their kid says that they're so homesick, they can't bear being without the parent. And think about that as sitting with your child's uncomfortable feelings and being okay that they're uncomfortable as long as they're not in danger. Because homesickness is an opportunity to develop and or learn or relearn strategies and resiliency for those kinds of feelings, don't you think?
Yeah, and the word that's coming to mind too is like
Mm.
self-soothing. And I know you do so much work with sleep.
Yes.
It's like an opportunity to just, yes, you're
Right.
unhappy. And so what can you do to move through this unhappiness?
Right.
Which is a question that we have to ask ourselves as adults. I mean, it is a tool, right?
Absolutely. It may not be homesickness, but we're going to have negative feelings in our lives, all of us, at one point or another. And we're going to have a lot of the time we have to power through. We can't be removed from the situation in order to kind of quote unquote cure the feeling.
Exactly. We have to stay we're in it. And again, we could be in a job
Yes.
that's really important for our family financially, and we can't really leave. And so we need to find a way to stay that works for us where we can soothe ourselves. We can't always
Yes.
leave.
I completely agree. And that leads to my next question, which may or may not be the last, which is how do you know when it is important to pull your kid out? Like how would a parent know if it was really going kind of drastically wrong?
Yeah. I think a couple things. I just want to reiterate what I said earlier, that when it's not going well, even if it's drastically going badly, I think you learn things pulling them out and keeping them in. Like I think you learn either way. So I guess I just want to reiterate again, like taking the pressure off of there being like a right answer. Like even asking me, it's like, what is the thing that you, and it's too hard to say
Yeah.
that because I mean, I think, if, and this was happening a lot during COVID, if you're hearing from people or your kid that there's any sort of self-harm, they absolutely need to come
Yes.
home,
I agree.
right? If they, and when we say danger, I mean, I'm thinking about it as a therapist's requirements of danger of hurting themselves or
Yeah.
others. If they're talking about any suicidal thoughts, if they're talking about any homicidal thoughts, if there's anything physically happening to
Hmm.
them. And so I think this goes back to the initial piece, which is who is their point person? Who is the person they can tell? And I think that if you're concerned and you reach out to the point person and there's confirmation from the point person and maybe another point
Right.
person, you're paying a lot for this
Yes.
place,
Yes.
right? You have the right to figure out and talk to the people who work there and try to understand better what's happening with your kid. For example, you could say, my kid is telling me these things, that these things are happening. I'd like you to observe them for a day and give me feedback about what it looks like at this time, at this time, at this. I mean, why not? So to kind of gather
Hmm.
data so that you can then make a good
Yeah.
decision. And I think if the more clear you are on this, is it's not a big deal if they leave, it's not a big deal if they stay, like either is fine. The more you can kind of clear out the muck that this is like some sort of has anything to do with you or them, you'll get clarity on what needs to happen.
Right.
Like I think parents do know what needs to happen. It's just all of these kinds of other pieces that get in our way that cloud our judgment.
Yes.
Does that
It makes
make sense?
perfect sense, and I think it kind of goes back to a theme that we reiterate almost across the podcasts, all the podcasts that we do, which is I think it's really important to ask yourself what are the facts? Because one of the things that kids are very good at is manipulation. Kids are great at manipulation. So a kid may be, and I'm not saying this is true for every kid, but a kid may be, I don't want to be at camp. It's horrible here. The food is disgusting, the et cetera, et cetera. All of these things, and may know exactly what points to touch on that would worry the parent. And when in reality, the kid might just want to come home and be on video games. So I think part of this picture is being attuned to your child, matching that or comparing it with what the point person is telling you. And if you still feel that you need to bring them home and you're still concerned that, I mean, because you're still concerned that they're not happy, I think you have to put a boundary down about the video games. I think it has to be you can come back and we'll find something else for you to do because you can't be on video
I think that's a
games.
great
Yeah.
point. I think that's a really good point because you might also hear something like, when you come home, these are our expectations. Then they might say, oh, actually, I'm not
Well,
coming
and in
home.
my practice that is exactly what happens.
That is a
Yeah,
really great
the
that's a really
kids are
great
like,
point.
"I'm miserable, I'm being bullied," so and so. I mean, they have these extravagant stories, which may or may not be true,
Mm.
but the when the parent says, "Listen, I hear you, you seem very distressed, and we can bring you home. I'm just gonna let you know that we will be removing your video console and electronics for the remainder of the summer." All of a sudden, camp is a much better place. And
Great
yeah, I
strategy.
mean, and it's not, you could look at it as a threat. I don't think of it as a threat or a punishment. If you come home, you're going to be punished.
It's a
But it's just a
consequence.
consequence. I'm not going to let you be on video games. There's plenty of other things to do, right? Because kids
Yeah.
today are I mean, a lot of kids today are very addicted to the video games, to the gaming, and it's a
It's
pull.
another benefit of them going
Yeah.
away if you can. I mean, again, it's so expensive, but they are on their phones, and I think I think you're bringing up such a good point about that, and made me think too that when some of the social problems that kids might be having at camp with their bunk mates, I also just think it's really important to figure that out with the people who are there. Like that is what happens in the rest of life. If camp is a little laboratory, leaving something that was hard and socially, that's just not really what we can do in life.
Right, exactly. And again, thinking through, are they in danger? And if they're not in
A hundred
danger,
percent.
then it should be fine. I just want to say one more thing to our listeners who cannot afford summer camp and will be having their children at home. And this has to do with electronics. A friend of mine years ago had no ability to send her kids to camp, just couldn't afford it. So she had no screens summer. So she said, no screens summer, no television. And when they got old enough to where phones and other forms of screens came in, she said, nope, you can't have those. She unplugged it all. And it was a summer unplugged. And boy, here's the fascinating thing. They complained bitterly at the beginning, but they adjusted and found other things to do. And now these kids are late 20s and early 30s, and they say, actually, it was a really great time. We got to hang out with each other.
Oh,
We played in the backyard. I mean, I know New Yorkers don't have backyards, but the majority of the world does. We're kind of unusual. But, or as you said, to find the local resources. And so I'm urging all parents in the summer to just be like, no screens, get rid of the screens. Parents will often say to me, but then I have to babysit my kids, as if you can babysit your own children. But that's not true. You can give them projects to do, you can get little art projects, whatever, and just say, figure it out. Figure it out. You can do this. And that makes them more resourceful in the end and keeps them from using the I'm bored, I have nothing to do, why can't I watch TV as a manipulative tool.
definitely. And I have found in my practice, and I found this with my children too, time and time again, when you ask them what was the best part of camp, not being on my phone.
Absolutely.
They also feel it. It
Absolutely.
exactly what your friend saw. It's an addiction that in the beginning it's very hard, but ultimately inside they know that they don't want to be on
Exactly.
it.
Exactly. Because it doesn't feel healthy. It's like eating unhealthy food.
Right. Right. It's like summer could be healthy. Like let's have a healthy summer.
Exactly. So, do you have one thing that you'd like to leave our listeners with? I think we've given a lot of good advice, I think, if I do say so myself.
I exactly. I guess I just want to say that what's coming up for me is just that parenting is challenging. That's why we're here to talk about these
Yeah.
topics. If we said, send everybody to camp, don't send everybody to camp, pick them up when they cry, there just is no clear
Yeah.
indication of what to do. And that if you take anything away from all of the work that we do, is get the facts and keep checking in with yourself.
Yes.
Like if you can do those two things, you will be more clear-headed in making these tough decisions that come up in
Yes.
parenting.
And I'm going to add one more thing that you said onto this, which is that either way, no matter what decision you make, it's still an opportunity for learning.
Yes, that is correct. And isn't it all an opportunity for learning? What a gift that I get to learn from you
Oh,
here too.
and me,
Thank
you.
you.
You've been listening to the Parenting Horizons podcast. If you would like to reach Elizabeth Cohen, you can go to www.centerforcbtinnyc.com.
And if you'd like to reach Julie Ross, please go to www.parentinghorizons.com.